Do you love ideas for turning your 12 by 12 pattern paper into cards without making scraps? Or are you new to card making and would love some fast, simple ideas? Hi, I'm Jess from jesscrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So today I want to share my latest class, 18 Valentine cards in 1 hour. Now, while I cannot guarantee the results of 1 hour, I will share as many tips and tricks to help speed up the process as I think will work today. So I offer the class for free. I'm very clear with the measurements. You can follow along with the video and complete the cards. Or you can go to the Etsy shop and purchase this supplemental workbook, which will give you the directions and the sketches for you to print out and refer to. So let's start by gathering the supplies we will need. We'll be taking 3 pieces of 12 by 12 paper and making 18 cards today. We're going to start by, if you have it, gather the workbook so that you have whatever sketches and templates that you need. I am including the how to cut the 12 by 12 patterned paper, as well as what the how to cut some cardstock to go with it, because we will be using just a few cardstock mats, but they're all the same size today, and sketches. I have both A2 and A6 versions of the sketches, and I have samples in the book about what the sketches will look like in the A2 and A6 version. I will be working with A2 cards today and with 8.5 by 11 cardstock, but this can be adapted to the A4 and I believe they're A6 sized cards and cardstock. Okay, so some other supplies that we are going to need. We'll start with our patterned paper. Now, I'm recommending 12 sheets of patterned paper to make 18 cards. You actually can make 6 cards with each sheet of patterned paper. So if you want, you can just pick one double-sided paper and just recreate one set of the cards. But I'm going to show you how to do it with all of them. And then some other things to note is it can be single-sided paper and it can be directional pattern paper. The pattern paper that I have happens to be double-sided and some of it is directional, but I wanted to make sure that it worked for a large variety of papers so you could really pick from your stash or easily find some paper that would work well for it. You're going to need 10 sheets of white cardstock or whatever cardstock you want to use for your card bases. I recommend white for card bases, and again that you can make A2 or A6 card bases. And then 2 sheets of coordinating colored, and I'm recommending colored here. I don't think doing white on white would make sense because these are going to be your cardstock mats, but you could use something simple like a neutral as well. Colored cardstock in the 8.5 by 11 or A4 size. And these are going to be for cutting the mats. Then I recommend, if you are going to add sentiments to your card, to pick a sentiment set that has some small words. I am not going to make my cards they are going to be Valentines. They aren't going to explicitly say Happy Valentine's Day. I'm using the Wordfetti Sunny Days from scrapbook.com and a stamp block that's already a little bit dirty, but and then Lobster ink from Fawn, but you can choose whatever color of ink you want, whatever stamp set you want. I am recommending the small stamp set because we're going to cut strips of cardstock from one of the extra sheets of white cardstock to add our sentiments to the card to keep things simple and to make the card making fast. And then some other supplies you're going to need is a paper trimmer. I use a Swingline guillotine trimmer, and I'll show you that in the video, but you can use whatever paper trimmer works well for you. You can also technically cut things with like a ruler and an X-Acto knife, but a paper trimmer is a great basic tool even if you're just getting started with card making. You're going to need some adhesive. I generally use the Scotch Advanced Tape Glider, but you can use a liquid glue. I like the scrapbook.com Artiste glue. And you just want to think about a glue that will not wrinkle your patterned paper, and which will matter more if you have thinner patterned paper. And then you're going to want some coordinating ephemera. So I am using the Bella Boulevard Our Love Song collection, and I have some of the ephemera icons. Now this isn't the full pack of them because I have used the part of this collection on other cards in the past, but I recommend coordinating ephemera in order to keep your card making quick. If you're going to make less cards, or if you're not trying to make them as quickly, you can get images from, like, you can get stamped images from your stash and color those and cut them out and things like that. There are other choices out there. And then some optional supplies would be organizing trays. I use the ones from scrapbook.com. I like those quite a bit. They're large enough to fit a card base and all the pattern paper that I need. Additionally, I recommend a scoring board, bone folder, and a scissor. If you do not have a scoring board, I'm going to just use this to fold my card bases in half by like making a scoring line down the center. So you could just fold them in half without the scoring line. And then I usually just add a scissor because there's just times where I want to cut something up smaller, or like little adjustments I need to make, and I think a scissor is a really great basic supply to have on hand. Our first step is to create card bases. When using tools like paper trimmers, please follow all manufacturer's safety instructions. I am going to start with 8.5 by 11 cardstock and cut the 11-inch side down to 5.5 inches. This is going to be the most challenging part for me to keep my camera in focus, so if my movements are a little bit awkward, it's partly because I am trying to make sure that the camera doesn't lose focus. So again, taking that 11-inch side, cutting it to 5.5 inches, which leaves this as 8.5 inches, and we're going to score that in half. I am cutting 2 sheets at a time because my paper trimmer can handle that amount of cardstock, and it does speed up the process a little bit. Of course, in day-to-day card making, I do just tend to cut a whole bunch of card bases at one time and have them ready to go. But I did want to make sure for this class that I kept it very beginner friendly and explained each step of the process. You can also, these are going to create like a particular fold on the card, and so like a horizontal type, it's not the best way to describe it, but you could also cut, instead of cutting it 5.5, which is half of the paper, you could choose instead to cut it at 4.25, and it would just make a card that opened on the short side as opposed to a card that opened on the long side. I think that's the best way to describe that difference. And then we are going to have to score each of these and fold them in half from there. Now, that might be a better time-saving tip. However, it doesn't work as well with my particular scoring board, is you could score the piece of cardstock first. So you're scoring at the 4.25 mark. So when you have the full sheet of cardstock on the 8.5 by 11-inch side, you could score the entire thing at the 4.25-inch mark and then cut them in half. But my scoring board, which is quite old at this point, no longer made, etc., just does not have the length to do that. I've thought about getting a new one, but you know, it works and it really only serves one like pretty clear function. So I actually am scoring 2 at a time. I'm not sure, or most of the time I am. This happens to be one sheet. I'm not sure if that's what I would always recommend that you do, but again, for the sake of time, the point of scoring them, and that's just kind of creating a little like indent down the center, is to make the fold in the card a little bit more crisp. So if you were, for instance, to just fold it in half, and now I can demonstrate that on one of these, you might get a little bit of extra creases in the card, or maybe not quite as smooth of a fold. And even still with this bone folder can be really helpful to press down the seams. So otherwise you're kind of pressing them down with your finger, but I was thinking, you know, maybe you could use like a craft stick or something also to press them down. But either way, it's just, if you make a lot of cards, you'll wind up, using it enough that I think it's worth it. It's a pretty inexpensive thing. So again, trying to keep my hand in the center of the frame so that my camera doesn't come out of focus, and folding in all of my card bases. I wouldn't necessarily recommend folding 2 cards at one time, even though I scored 2 cards at one time. I don't think that would be worth the time saving because you won't get as nice of a flat fold here. But I'm on my pile off to the side. I'm bringing them over one at a time and running the edge of the bone folder along the edge of the card to give it a nice clean look. And I'm going to I realized I cut all 10 sheets and then scored all 10 sheets, which is not what I meant to do. I made a small mistake. I meant to make sure I had 9 of them cut and scored and folded. And then the last sheet of cardstock is what I'm going to be using for my card bases. Well, I just made a mistake there and I didn't get a perfect fold. So we'll put that off to the side and use that as one of the pieces of cardstock that I'm going to use for the second idea. So I do still want to cut it in half. That doesn't really change, so it's okay that they are already trimmed. We're going to be making them into little sentiment strips though, so we're going to cut them at that from 5.5 to 5.5 by 1/2 inch strips. So we'll take a look at that in just a second, but I gotta finish folding up all these cards. The only thing about doing it live, because I do like to show you like you really can do it quickly, is that sometimes these simpler steps, it's, okay, I get it, you folded all the cards for sure, but I do want to make this class feel as like clear and accessible as possible. So that 10th sheet of cardstock, I did want to cut it in half to 5.5 by 8.5, but then I wanted to cut 1/2 inch strips, and that's because my particular stamp set, 1/2 inch strips, I will be able to fit my words on them. However, if you have a different size stamp set, you might need like 1 inch strips or 3/4 inch strips. So adjust it to the size of your stamp set. So then I'm just going to go from 8.5 to 8, and I'm going to cut 1/2 inch pieces off. I can put about 2 sentiments on each one of these pieces that is 5.5 by 1/2 inch strip. And so therefore I'm just going to need to cut 9 of them because 9 times 2 is 18. So I will have some extra cardstock at this step. I'm okay with that because well, one, I don't really worry about cardstock scraps. Cardstock scraps, especially white cardstock scraps, are always quite useful. But the other thing is, if I make a mistake, I'm probably going to want to stamp more than just the exact 18 sentiments that I want, so I'm okay with cutting some extra strips of cardstock. And then also, if I make a mistake later on and I need that extra card base, I already have it cut and prepared, ready to go. So I have enough of these cardstock strips. Let's go ahead and make our sentiments. From the scrapbook.com Wordfetti Sunny Days, I have chosen You're Awesome as my sentiment. So even though it doesn't explicitly say Happy Valentine's Day, I think it's a great encouragement card, and we'll have some other Valentine theming, but of course you could go with something that does say that. And I have the Fawn Lobster ink because there was red in my patterned paper, and I am going to apply the ink to my stamp, and then I'm going to stamp You're Awesome on each side of 9 strips of patterned paper. I'm trying to decide if it makes more sense to put the stamp to the ink pad or the ink pad to the stamp. I think it's a little bit faster if you can apply the, like just tap the stamp over the ink pad rather than to place it down and turn everything over, but it might be a little bit messier. It's a little bit louder on camera because it kind of keeps tapping. So, that's probably not a consideration in your craft room, but this is also a stamp I've used a few times. So sometimes the more you use a stamp, the better the stamp impressions get. And so if you have a brand new stamp and you're finding that you're not getting really good impressions the first time, then, there are ways that, like, people say you can rub it on like a bit of leather and that helps prime it, but what I usually do is just stamp it a few times. So just go to some scraps or, and just stamp it off a few times. I do also like to be careful that my stamps aren't picking up little stray hairs or, I don't know, different things in the craft room, because then that can affect their stamping as well. So little things to watch out for in terms of lining up the stamps, because actually You're Awesome is made of 2 different words here, and a lot of sentiments are not, but sometimes they are. There's a lot of stamp blocks have little guidelines on them, and so I recommend using the guidelines to help you, maybe putting them down on a grid mat like I am using here, so that they make sure they're lined up, and then testing the stamp a few times to make sure that you really like how it's going, you lined it up straight, that kind of thing. And so that can, again, eat into your time a little bit. But I have sentiments on each side here, and my goal would be to probably turn these into banners later, but I will show that to you. So like how I do that. There are a few that are maybe not absolutely perfect, so I could stamp a few extra, since we also did cut a few extra strips. And so that's up to you, check and evaluate your results and make sure that you are happy with how it's turning out. So if you have seen some of my other classes, those are steps I will often repeat in the class in terms of making card bases or stamping simple sentiments. But now we're getting into the real details of this class and the cutting template. We're going to cut our 12 by 12 patterned paper. I'm going to make sure that I have my cutting template right next to me from the workbook. And of course, I recommend that if you purchase the workbook, but if not, I'll be really clear with all of the measurements. So I got to cut the branding strips off. I actually have all 3 pattern papers in my trimmer right now. I might not keep all 3 throughout the entire process, but I'm going to cut that branding strip off. Again, this is Our Love Song from Bella Boulevard. And then I am going to cut. Let's just review the measurements really quick. There are 12 by 12 divides into 4-inch pieces, 3 times perfectly. And so we're going to make 4 by 5 1/4 inch rectangles from the top, and that's one set of the cards. Then to go with that, here across the center, we are going to cut, so this was 5 1/4. We're going to cut a strip that is 12 by 3 1/4. And then we're going to cut that 12 by 3 1/4 into 2-inch pieces. And we're going to use half of them on one set of cards and the other half on the other set of cards. So half for sketch 1, half for sketch 2. They are labeled here in the corner so you know what they're for. And then that's also why they're color coded. And then finally, we're going to need 12 by 3 1/2 inches. Cut those into those 4-inch sections, and that's going to be what we need for each of our cards today. So I am going to start by cutting the 5 1/4 inch off. I am noticing that maybe cutting them all at the same time wasn't great because the branding strip did not come completely off the center one. So let's put one to the side, and then that way I can say the measurements twice. So we're starting at 12 inches, and we need to bring it to 5 1/4. Because we need 5 1/4 by 12 inches. In the sketch, it shows that coming off the top. I suppose technically I'm cutting it off the bottom here. It doesn't particularly matter. Then the other, we need 12 by 3 1/4. So I'm gonna bring it to 3 1/4, and that will leave me with pieces that are 12 by 3 1/2. So I will repeat those measurements. Again, there was just a little bit of branding strip left. That's going to be hard to cut off. That's why it wasn't worth it to try to cut 3 at one time. Lesson learned. I mean, sometimes it can handle it, and it depends on how thick your patterned paper is, but okay. So we're going to cut it to 12 by 5 1/4, 12 by 3 1/4, and that will leave me with a 12 by 3 1/2 inch piece. Okay, so all of these pieces that are 3 1/2 by 12, I am going to cut at 4 inches. So I start at 12, and I'm going to cut them. As you can see, there's a little bit of variation. It's probably because of that branding strip, but I don't know. I make little mistakes here and there. Okay, so I'm cutting it I'm cutting 4 inches off. So from 12 to 8, and then from 8 to 4. And those are pieces that I need for sketch number 2. This is a good point to start organizing things. So I'm gonna put those in an organizing tray. And then I need my pieces that are 3 1/4 by 12. And I am going to cut those at the 2-inch mark. I need 3 sets of them for sketch 2. And so cutting it at 10, 8, and then 6, and I'm placing all of those in that same tray. That's everything I need for all the cards with sketch 2. Then I'm gonna cut it to at 2 inches, but so 4, and then again at 2. Okay. And all of those are for sketch 1, so I'm going to place it in a separate tray, and then I'm going to cut the other pieces I need for sketch 1, and they are going to be 4 inches wide again. So taking this 12-inch piece, this is just the back side of those papers, and cutting it at 8 inches, and again at 4 inches, so that I have 4 by 5 1/4 inch pieces. And all of my pattern paper is cut and sorted into 2 trays. The next thing we're going to do is cut some of the cardstock. I have 2 pieces of coordinating colored cardstock. I chose blue because I didn't want to put too much pink into these cards. I think that this collection is really well suited to a variety of people, so I liked to pull out a different color. And then also if I didn't want them to be particularly for Valentine's Day, I had some room to work with. So for the 8 1/2 by 11 cardstock cutting template, it is showing you how to cut mats for those 2 by 3 1/4 inch pieces. So they're going to be 2 1/4 by 3 1/2. A 1/4 inch bigger on each side. There are going to be some cardstock scraps. We can turn those into fake foam tape, or we can use them on another card. So the first thing that I'm actually going to do is cut my cardstock to 2 1/4 inch wide by the full 11 inches. Now this is going to create little more like small pieces of cardstock, so you can choose to cut things a little bit differently, but I'm fine with it. I'm going to use those, like I said, for fake foam tape, probably not to use on today's cards, but in the future. So I'm measuring it to 2 1/4. The other option is to take the 8 1/2 measurement and subtract 2 1/4. So whichever way is easier for you. I'm like second guessing my ability to measure right now. 1 inch, 2 inch, 2 1/4. There we go. I think I was about to cut it wrong. Okay, so 2 1/4 by 11. Again, I'm going to subtract 2 1/4, and I have another piece that's 2 1/4 by 11, and my final piece, measuring it this time just to the 2 1/4 inch mark by 11. And then this is that scrap piece that is shown on the cutting template. All these measurements and cutting stays the same for the A6 cards, except for when you cut the card bases, you needed to cut them to the A6 size, and they were going to be cut, basically you're gonna cut that cardstock in half and then fold it in half, just like we did with the 8 1/2 by 11, but it's gonna be slightly different measurements. Okay, so the next thing that we need is the 3 1/2 inch pieces. So what I can do, and I am cutting both sheets at one time here, is I can bring it each time to 3 1/2 or subtract it. Like 3 1/2 plus 3 1/2 is 7. So I cut that little inch off, or say ½ inch off at the bottom. Let me make sure that that is the right measurement, because then I can help you explain it a little bit. An alternate way to make sure it makes sense. Okay, so that's ½ inch that I cut off on the bottom. Like I said, make those fake foam tape. I need half of these for sketch 2 and half of these for sketch 1. So I'm just gonna sort them into the sorting trays as I go. Okay, so I'm cutting ½ inch off the bottom. So I'm cutting this to 10 1/2. Then cutting it to 7, because that 10 1/2 minus 3 1/2 is 7. And then 7 minus 3 1/2 is 3 1/2. So that's where I'm getting those measurements from, placing that in my trays and getting a lot of my cardstock cut quickly, but these mats are really gonna help the pattern paper stand off from the other patterned paper. Okay, so bringing it, like I said, cutting 1/2 inch off, bringing it to 7, bringing it to 3.5, and then taking half of these, because I put 1 whole stack in sketch 1, 1 whole stack in sketch 2, and now I'm gonna have to separate it because I need 1/2 and 1/2 into the different trays. And now I have all my pieces organized together. When giving the directions in the workbook, the next step that I recommend is to add adhesive to the back of all of these 2 by 3¼ inch pieces at the same time and gluing them onto or adhering them onto their cardstock mats. You could work on like just completing like all of one set of cards and then the other set of cards, but it's totally up to you the order in which you want to do it. I want to make sure that I'm mixing up patterns. So I am going to turn some of these over and add adhesive and then place them all on their cardstock mats. And this is just to ensure that I have a variety of options to choose from. I'm a little bit concerned that my adhesive is going to affect the focus of the camera, but I will do my best. Okay, so I like to just put it, one of the reasons that I like to work with the tape runner is I can put tape runner on a whole bunch of pieces at one time, whereas if I was using liquid glue, I could only put glue down and then I'd have to place it onto its mat and then do the next one because it would start drying. So it's something to keep in mind if you're thinking about like, you know, quick card making when you need to go a little bit faster, or that's if you're mass producing, right? Like if you're not making all of these cards at once, then again, you could go ahead and switch back to the glue and just take your time with it. But in order to make it quick, that tape adhesive works really well. And here I've kept them separated. So this is everything for sketch 1, and I can put it back in the tray for sketch 1. But I, like I said, I did recommend it a little bit different in the workbook. However, I do recommend in either situation, keeping things really well sorted. So we'll do the same thing again here, where I have my stack of mats, and this is, I'm just pulling it out of the bin for sketch number 2. And I want to mix up the patterns, so I'll just flip over a few of them. I kind of just have to think about like, which is my favorite pattern? Which do I think will work well for, because all of these are actually going to be where I put my embellishments. So there is an argument, and I do want to stop and take a second to think about this. If you don't want to be placing your embellishment on a busy pattern paper, you can choose all of your simpler patterns for this particular part of the sketch. So if you're working with double-sided pattern paper like I am, and you have generally a like busy and less busy side, you could choose the less busy side for your small rectangles, as that is where I will generally recommend that you put your sentiment and your embellishment. But it's up to you in the end. You can decorate things a little bit differently than I'm going to, and it's not necessarily a problem if it's busy, but maybe we'll make things a little bit easier and choose a few less busy sides for this particular set. And again, just adding all that adhesive at one time throughout all of these rectangle pieces. Okay, and then putting them on their cardstock mats. Also, you know, you could be mixing up what color of cardstock. You could use 2 different colors, you know, one set of colors for sketch 1, cardstock color for sketch 1 and 1 cardstock color for sketch 2. And I actually don't think that would add very much time, but it could add some interest if you just want to like make your cards look a little bit more different than each other. But we are using, like I said, a variety of patterned paper. And I generally recommend for these cards that you put 2 different patterns together, but you could of course only put 1 pattern on the same card. So like what I'm saying there is you could put the large piece and the small piece as the same pattern on the card in the end. Okay, so Then I have all of my small pieces adhered to their cardstock mats, and I'm ready to just start assembling the cards. Take a look at A2 sketch number 1. Now I realize I'm taking like little pauses here, and that's partly so that like I don't run out of voice in teaching, take a sip of water, that kind of thing, but also I am moving things around a little bit on my desk. I don't think it's taking up a significant amount of time. I do still think we'll be fine with the time constraints. So A2 sketch number 1 calls for, and it's the same thing if the A4, we assemble it exactly the same way. We are going to place our patterned paper, our large piece, on the card directly, and then place one of the smaller pieces on the top center. You could of course move it around, but let's get started with adhering down that patterned paper. Now I think this is a good time for when you're using the background piece can be a little bit busier. A little scrap of paper on that one. I recommend to, add a good amount of adhesive without going overboard. I think this is something that can be a little bit tricky as a card maker. We want to make sure that our cards can survive the mail and however else they're going to be handled and being handled. But if your adhesive is strong, then you usually don't need quite as much as you think that you do. So what I'm going to do here is put adhesive on just a few of them, probably 3 at a time, since 9 cards divided by 3, that kind of works out. But then that will allow me to have enough space on my desk that things don't get too disorganized. Okay, put those down again. And even things like with the adhesive, and this is so silly because you don't have to speed through your cards, but laying them all in the same direction and then just kind of like running the adhesive down several of them is a way that when I really do like, okay, I'm gonna kick it up into high gear, I'm gonna make them fast, is something that I like to do. In terms of centering them onto the card bases, I don't have any amazing tips or tricks for this. I kind of just look at it and trust my gut. I will say that there's a lot of these patterned papers that I chose did wind up having a lot of white in the background, and so sometimes when I know that's going to happen, I will choose not a white card base. So that is something that you could keep in mind if you're kind of thinking like, oh, those look a little bit washed out or something like that. And you are wanting to, again, use a similar kind of background, then you could do it a bit differently than I did and use a colored cardstock for your card base. The only thing about that you might want to consider is that then when you go to write a sentiment on the inside, it might be a little bit less, like a little harder to read if you don't choose a light color, if you choose a dark color. And then what you can do there is just use a little bit of printer paper as like a liner inside of your card. So just adhere a bit of printer paper and then write your sentiment on top of that for like, say, if you used black cardstock in the background or something. But as you can see, like you really see that border differently than you do when you have the pattern paper with the white background. Okay, and then I have all of the like big pieces, and I like to do that as well. I'm placing all the large pieces. Then I'm going to go back and place all of these smaller pieces. So turning a bunch of these over at one time and adding adhesive to the back. And I'm going to think about the patterns. So I'm going to lay out a bunch of cards so that I'm not like, because if I don't think about it ahead of time, I might get to the point where I only have like rainbow small pieces and rainbow large pieces. And again, that's fine, but it might not be what I would prefer. So here, like that looks pretty cool. I don't think it looks bad, but I'm gonna go for more of a contrast. And I think that this will look great in the center or in the bottom right-hand corner. Part of the reason I showed it in the center is just so that if you were adding a like larger sentiment or embellishment, you would have plenty of room around it. Okay, so I do think that sometimes the background paper, and if you use your like more busy background paper, and you're more busy a rectangle on the front, that is not for everyone. However, I do always remind myself, like, the people who designed this paper collection thought about how everything looks together. Everything is going to really coordinate in terms of colors, and it's generally going to look good. That is one of the advantages of using a collection instead of just using like three papers that you pick out from your own stash. Not that you can't coordinate or like color coordinate. I am sure a lot of people are really great at that. It's not always my strongest suit. I do sometimes have a hard time like picking, which patterns go well together, but I've had a lot of practice over time. So hopefully I'm getting better at it. All right, so that looks fine. I don't want those to be together, but maybe I should save that because I do have two more of the simple ones. Okay, a simple one. Kind of look at my choices. That's kind of the problem with having them upside down here. Okay, like that together. The rainbows with the instruments, and then the black and white or the black with pink dots on the rainbows. And then that is all of the cards. All 9 cards for sketch 1 are assembled and they're just ready for embellishment and sent. We're gonna follow that same process for sketch number 2. Let's take a look at the A2 version. Again, the proportions are just a little bit different for A6, and I'll show you some A6 cards at the end of the video, because I always like to make a set of samples to make sure all my sketches, all my sketches and measurements and everything work ahead of time, so I have a different full set of this class. Okay, so A2 sketch number 2, where you're going to, instead of just having that that full piece covering the background, it's just going to be a partial piece, and we're going to put this a little bit off to the side. And so that also kind of just adds a little bit of variation. The other one was centered, this one's off to the side. You could, of course, put this one in the center if that looked better to you. So this is the set where we made sure more of these were neutral. So I'm going to make sure that more of the like busier patterns are showing at the top to kind of balance that out. So I'm putting all the like busy sides down and adding my adhesive to those. Okay. I'm getting to the point where it starts to be like difficult to know like what to talk about, because we've gotten into like a really good groove here, but that is a challenge of doing these classes in real time. But I hope that also seeing like how long it really does take is helpful to you, or how I save time so you can go, oh, that's not worth it. Like I'm okay with like, making things take a little bit longer. Like card making does not have to be urgent. Something that is a challenge about my ATG is if I do go too fast, sometimes the adhesive doesn't stick, and then it reminds me that I can slow down. This isn't urgent, but I want to make sure that I complete this in the hour. Okay, so again, now I have the adhesive on the back, putting it at the top center. With the A6 version, you're going to get a little bit less room around each of the sides on the top, but it will look even on all sides. The challenge of doing sketch number 1 as an A6 card, hopefully I'm not getting all my terms mixed up at this point, is that there's a little bit of extra on the top and bottom, which you might find a little bit awkward. And so what I would say about that is you could, if you decide that you don't like that little bit of extra at the top and bottom, is make it even on all sides, on the top and the 2 sides, and then just trim a little bit off the bottom so that you're getting a more similar look to the A2 version of the card. But again, that's totally up to you and what your like personal preference is, but I wanted to show you, because they did technically fit on A6 cards, how to make them for A6 cards. Oh, there I go, going too fast again. But still, like even with that little bit of that trouble that I have sometimes with the ATG, I really do reach for it over glue almost all of the time. When I'm putting small embellishments on cards, I tend to reach for my glue. Or if my paper, some papers have a bit of shine to them, they don't stick as well with tape adhesive than the sort of matte papers. And so sometimes glue can be helpful for those. Okay, so all of my background paper is on, and then I am ready to add all of my smaller triangles on the front. One of the reasons that you might like to do, like say, make all of these the front sides of your paper and all of these the back sides, is it's going to be a little bit easier to mix the patterns, or like to make sure the patterns stay mixed, because these won't match each other. Okay, so I kind of like this simple one, maybe with the rainbow. You can decide, like, and I kind of gave like a good gap along the bottom here, but how how far up or down do you like it? Totally up to you. Okay, and then some hearts. At this point, I'm kind of just choosing at random. I think this was the only one where I kept the quote-unquote busy side. So I thought a little bit more about which one I'd place that on, but I don't necessarily need to say, oh, okay, all my pink polka dots go on the instrument paper, because I do want it to not look like every single one of my cards is exactly the same. So put that adhesive down on these last 4 and pick a card for each of them. Hopefully I can just kind of go down the line. I am laying them down kind of gently, just in case I did decide, oh, actually, I don't like that pattern. I could quickly peel it back up. That's the other reason that I tend to like tape runner, is it's a little bit easier to peel up. Like liquid glue, so you can usually take it off, but then you're sometimes left with the glue behind it. So if you need to move it too much, it's kind of a mix. There's advantages to both in terms of moving things around on a card. But then they have all of the Sketch 2 cards assembled. Okay, I just realized that I stuck all of these on the bottom right-hand corner. I must have had Sketch 2 stuck in my head, or I know I mentioned that variant, but here's where the tape runner is gonna save me, because I'm gonna be able to move probably all of these, because again, I didn't press them down like super securely as I was going. So I am moving these all to the center, so they will look like they're supposed to. I'm sorry about that. Once I've fixed them all and placed them in the center where they belong, I'm going to lay them out and get ready to start embellishing. This is the set of cards where the some of the centers are my busier patterned papers, and so in particular I want to keep that in mind, because it might makes sense to choose some different embellishments based on that. Embellishments that are like easy to read, even though they are on a busy patterned paper. I divided up my die cuts into 2 trays. The ones here, I think, the bigger tray had some of the sentiments that were a little bit more love-based. Like this one says, I love you, love songs, our playlist. Those were ones that I was like, I'm not sure that I would use those for cards that I'm going to donate. So I moved some of them over, but then some of them I still think would work well. Like I think this jukebox would be fine. So we'll see. I'll probably pull from both trays, but I want to explain why there were 2 trays. So I think that I used the You're Awesome sentiment, but I think a You Rock sentiment would have been really fun for these particular set of cards as well, because a lot of them, so this has hearts on it, but I don't think of it, like I still think it would be great for cards to donate. And there are also some of these, the paper in the background here does say Our Mix and Love Songs and Forever. So I'll decide, how that works for me in the end. But I'm thinking like, I don't want to say put cassette tapes on the cassette tape paper probably. I think it was like wouldn't stand out, but maybe it would look fine on a different one. So something to keep in mind. Occasionally some of these pieces of ephemera do have sentiments sort of built into them, so I might not put an extra sentiment on those cards, and so I did want to say that. But the reason I didn't use the You Rock sentiment is because some of the images aren't necessarily music based, or like this card only has rainbows and dots, and so unless I put a music embellishment on it, it wouldn't necessarily make as much sense. I mean, it's a general enough sentiment, it's probably fine. But just as an explanation for like kind of why I leaned away from that. So once I have picked an embellishment that I like for each one, I can go in and adhere them all down. But I also want to talk about how I'm going to use the sentiments. So I'm going to, on each one of these, I'm going to place the sentiment off to one side or the other. So I'm going to cut one side of the sentiment straight, and then the other I'm going to cut on an angle. So it has sort of a banner shape. And I might not line it up with the edge of the center rectangle. It kind of just depends. Like some of them, if you look at it, like the width of this sentiment, it does fit on there. And so it depends on whether like how I kind of like the way that it looks with each embellishment. But I'm gonna go through and do that with each of these that I think needs a sentiment. And by choosing the same sentiment and the same color of sentiment, I'm reducing the amount of decisions that I have to make overall. And I do generally find that putting a sentiment on the left side of the card looks good. So I will probably do that for most of these. And I also tend to, for whatever reason, usually put the sentiment on the bottom, but I don't think you have to do that. But sometimes just making a decision like that, like I'm just gonna put all the sentiments on the bottom or all the embellishments on the top, does reduce, again, like the friction of getting the cards done in a quick manner, but it's not that important. And then here, like with this bigger embellishment, maybe I do want it to hang off the side. This one does have the You Rock, so I probably won't put a second embellishment on it. Here is a great time to, if you had those extra bits of cardstock, these scraps that we created, you could glue these together and put these down behind any of these embellishments to help them to pop off the card a little bit. And you can actually even do it just gluing a single layer of cardstock onto there, but doubling it up is a little bit more similar to foam tape, and it might make it so that the cards stand out a bit more. It kind of just depends on your personal preference. Usually it's okay in the US if you have a little bit of like dimension when you're mailing them, but I don't know how that works all over the place, and there's, results may vary and that kind of thing, as the rules can change over time. Like what works today isn't always going to be the same rules in the future. So that's just something to keep in mind. Obviously that would take a little bit of extra time, and you can decide whether or not that makes sense for your cards. And then, so as you see, I'm moving over to liquid glue, and this is now, in my opinion, going to be faster because I'm picking something up off the card and putting it right back down. Whereas if I had like a whole bunch of things lined up, I like the tape adhesive. So just kind of, again, giving you some insight into why I am making that variable decision. Also, as I'm going through and gluing these all down, I am holding my glue bottle upside down in between. I'm not like placing it down like this each time, because then the glue would have to come back to the top, and that, I mean, yeah, it saves time, but it's also just kind of frustrating to me. So I'm mostly doing it from that perspective, but yes, it also is the faster way because the glue's all ready to go. I know that sometimes there are like little like stands you can put your glue in, or some people put them in like a jar or something like that, so you can have it such that it's facing down when stored. But in this instance, since I'm using them everything really quickly, I don't even see the need to put it down. And having the cards spread out like this, not only did it help me to kind of pick embellishments and rearrange things and make sure that I was kind of picking the best thing for each card, it also meant that I can access each card all at the same time because they're not like overlapping each other too much or anything, or I don't have to keep moving things out of the way or whatever. So I'm able to get these all on. Also, the liquid glue here is helping me because if I want to make sure something is lined up and I place it down a little bit off the first time, I can kind of scooch it just a bit. And so I'll go through, and now that I've glued everything down, got a little bit of glue on each, I'll give it a little bit more of a press to make sure that the glue adhered in all of the spots. Hopefully, since I worked pretty quickly, it hasn't completely dried, but if I need to, get a little bit of glue underneath something like, say, over here on the skate or something like that, I could. And we will repeat the embellishment process for sketch number 2. Again, this is going to probably be even easier because it's going to be easy to decide, okay, that looks good because I'm not working with the busy pattern papers as my focal point. So then I will head back to these ones that I think aren't well suited to my cards. I will say I'm thinking like, okay, what's nice is that because the die cuts have a white border around them, I could put a black embellishment on a black background and it can look quite nice. But also I might decide that it doesn't stand out as much on a black background and move it over. So these are things to think about, particularly if you say you didn't have that white border. That is why that white border is popular for some people. Like some people really enjoy it because it gives you that ability to work on pattern paper better. So like this one here, I think that it kind of gets, doesn't really stand out on this white background, but it stands out nicer on a black background. But then this one is black, and see, actually this one doesn't have a border because there are some that don't. Missed that the first time. It works well. So just these little things that I am thinking about as I am picking my cards, or my embellishments for my cards. I think I really don't want this one on a white background. Is there a black roller skate? Or maybe a black embellishment would look pretty good there. Okay. Walkman? Is that what they used to? I think that's like a brand name. This is so, cassette player. I remember the time of cassettes. I've had a cassette player like this in my lifetime. But I'm still going, which way is up? And then I need one more embellishment. I could use the fun old school TV. I've had a TV with an antenna too. I think it's funny. I was like, when I was looking at some of the images from this collection, I was like, you might have to be careful not to give this to too young of kids because they might not really know what they're looking at here when they see some of these, like what is that an image of? But yeah, so then again, gonna come in with the sentiments. So you let me know, have you experienced this wide range of, like, I remember I liked roller skating when I was young. We had a skating rink. They are coming back. I feel like there are skating rinks still, but for a while I felt like it kind of fell out of popularity. And what was I thinking, like an old-fashioned radio? I don't know if the fact that I called it old-fashioned, right? I don't know if we ever had one quite like that. I certainly remember the radio. But now a lot of us, we listen to things on on-demand music and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's interesting when you talk to the younger generation and they're just like, oh, that's quite different. Having to have to own the specific music you wanted, like getting the CD or the cassette and having to make those tough decisions about, which is your favorite artist because you can only have so many of it. And now they can just kind of call up whatever they want on YouTube or otherwise. So, all right. Picking the You're Awesome. So actually that one, so there, I think that the banner should be going the other way. So I'll move that to another card. And the reason that I think that is like, because the embellishment is on the left side, and so I'm trying to balance it with the sentiment by putting the sentiment on the right side. Or like here with the roller skates, I want the sentiment to be like flowing into the roller skate, not like they're going in two different directions, for instance. So I'm gonna keep that in mind with anything that, especially something that has like directionality like that, it's like a sense of movement. You'll wanna make sure that I think it looks best if they're moving towards each other. Okay, and then this one down here, I'm kind of thinking it's so big, I don't know if I want to add a sentiment, or if I did, I don't know if I'd want the sentiment to be on an angle. So I might just leave it be. Some of these also, you might want to trim more or less off the edges to make it fit on the cards. Okay, and so now that I kind of have it the way I like it, I'm trying to again think like, I guess I could put it there, but I also could put it straight across. I think it's okay to leave it off. I think that that makes this a card for many, many occasions. So again, coming back to that glue, I did not cap my glue in between, which I might regret now. Oh, good. Lucky for me, it did not, like, you know, if you forget to cap your glue and a little bit of glue dries in the tip of the bottle, I was afraid that was going to happen, but you know, we're working quickly today, so it was not sitting very long while I picked out all of these different embellishments. And I just got into the pattern of gluing all these sentiments down, but that means I'll probably at the end accidentally lift them up and all the embellishments will fall off. So I should complete each card as I go. So gluing these on. These are roller skates instead of roller blades. I was talking with a friend about that the other day, like how long has it been since we roller skated and or roller bladed all those years ago, and what I would be afraid to fall nowadays, I'll say that. I'll probably be out there with the knee pads and everything. So continuing to add a little bit of liquid glue to the back of each of these, generally putting the sentiment up against the edge of the cardstock mat that is around these small rectangles. I like that way that looks. I like to break the box a little bit there. That's another thing you can think about with embellishments, is sometimes it looks great if things are centered, and sometimes it looks better if it's overhanging a little bit. And that's what I did on a lot of these. I made sure the embellishment came completely out of the box, like out of the mat, out of the pattern paper box. But then with the sentiment, I lined up the flat edge against the cardstock mat. So it's breaking the box, but not quite in the same way. But it tends to look a little bit more interesting than just lining up everything in the center. If you do prefer to have everything lined up in the center, that's absolutely fine. There's no reason not to do that, but then maybe you wouldn't want to cut the banner or this like diagonal on just one edge. Instead, you might prefer to cut the diagonal. Originally I had decided that would go on the left side, and then I placed it down on the right side. So now it's a little bit opposite of my sentiment. This is one of those reasons why I stamp extra sentiments, so that if I make a mistake, although of course it's not really a mistake, I could just make it work, I have an extra to quickly cut and add to my card without having to like get the stamp set back out or anything like that. And so, but yeah, you could center everything in instead of cutting the slant on both. You could either cut, instead of cutting the slant on one side and flat, you could cut slants on both sides and center it. Or you could measure it all the way across these and cut it to that. I think that would be a little bit trickier. I think this way, again, just saving a little bit of time. Right, so I have my stack of 18 Valentine cards made in 1 hour. Now, I admit mine are not the most clearly Valentine cards. They can be used for many other occasions despite all the heart imagery featured on them, but I did want to show you them real quick. And then I did make a second set of these, and that second set is what I used when I was doing a lot of the pictures for the workbook. The workbook is available in the Etsy shop. There's a link in the video description with a small coupon code as well. You get all the templates that you need so that you don't have to pay attention or rewatch the video to hear the measurements. I mean, of course, write them down, follow the video. I really think you'll be able to be successful with just the video. But I wanted to show you a little bit of the other cards and some of the A6 versions of the cards. So this is with a paper rose collection and a lawn fawn stamp that actually says Happy Heart Day, so they're more traditionally Valentine. But this, the ephemera that I'm using, there was a piece of the paper rose paper that you could just cut all these little stamp images out of. So that is where I got those, and that's a great way. What I like about, I designed this class specifically with 12 by 12 paper, and when I design for 12 by 12 paper, I like to keep in mind that 12 by 12 paper tends to have larger designs, and so I wanted to make sure none of the pieces that you were using were very small. I don't want little half-inch strips. I mean, sometimes I've made templates with that, but it's something that I wanted to mention. Here's the A6 version. The A6 version of the card, it gives you a little bit narrower of an edge all around sketch number 2, and then for sketch 1 there's the narrow edge on the side, but then there's a little wider on the top and bottom. As mentioned earlier, if you want, you could make it even on all sides and then just cut a little bit extra off the bottom so that you have something that looks a little bit more similar to the A2 version. It should still be made with A4 cardstock and still fit in the envelopes for A6 cards. So whichever way you would like to do it, but I wanted to show you those. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community. Subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.